Hi, everybody. This is Melody LeBaron of Transforming Space, Self, and Loss. And it's mid-November, and I am here for another Agents of Transformation interview, this time with Aditi Sethi-Brown and Cassie Barrett. And these two women have formed a business together called the Center for Conscious Living and Dying. Aditi is a friend and she works for Care Partners. She's a hospice physician. And Cassie works at probably what is the most beautiful green burial memorial sanctuary that I've ever seen in the United States. It's called Carolina Memorial Sanctuary. So I'm wondering if the two of you, Aditi and then Cassie, if you could tell us a little bit more about yourselves. And then the question I have is, how did you meet and how did you decide to start this business together?
Thank you, Melody, for the introduction. So I've been doing death work first as a volunteer when I was about 17 in undergrad. I became a hospice volunteer. There was a death fair at our college, Davidson College, north of Charlotte. And there was a booth, a hospice booth, and a woman just with the most beautiful smile was very welcoming. And she invited us to come learn about hospice. And I'd never heard of hospice, despite growing up in a community of physicians and medical providers. I never thought about death. And as she was describing what a hospice volunteer does and what the training involved, there was just this deep resonance. And as a 17-year-old insecure college kid, I just realized, you know what, all these things will pass. And one day I too will die. And it was just this epiphany, really, just in those 5 minutes. And there was a deep knowing that I was going to do more of this work. And so I did the hospice training, and it was a beautiful program. And all hospice programs actually have a volunteer program. It's part of the requirement. So I did that throughout my undergraduate years, just really rewarding experiences, sitting at the bedside with people and supporting folks in very simple ways. I spent time with a young woman who had breast cancer. Her children just needed companionship. And so I did that as a volunteer. So it's not always, there's so many ways to show up for people who are dying. And then I decided to go to medical school, and I went to the Medical College of Georgia. And at that time, there was maybe 1 hour devoted to end-of-life care. And
Wait,
I remember.
When was this?
It was just 2004 to 2008. So it's pretty recently.
Goodness.
And it was the way it was discussed was through this play called Wit, which is a phenomenal play about a woman with cancer and going through the medical system and feeling how dehumanizing it was for her to be a patient on the wards as people are rounding. And if you all know what that means, it's just medical language. You've seen TV shows with doctor shows where people in groups, students in groups, go to the bedside. And it can be a very vulnerable position for individuals. So I noticed that with my death awareness and awareness of the benefits of hospice, I realized that there was so little time devoted to this and so much fear around death and dying.
Right.
And I saw many people die alone and in pain because docs were afraid to use medications to keep folks comfortable for fear of murdering them. And then just denial. So they just didn't talk about it. So it really was transformative just going through the medical system and training. And I did bring some workshops and seminars to my medical school because I saw the lack there. So there was always this desire to fill the gaps and to educate, and it started, there.
Wow.
And then I did my medical training. That's what brought me to Asheville. I did my training at Mayhack, and luckily Care Partners started a fellowship program to train physicians, and I was one of the first fellows. There was another woman and myself. So I started hospice work then. 2011, I was a fellow, and then 2012, I joined Care Partners. So I've been doing death and dying work for quite some time. And in that work, I've realized that there's still so much more that needs to be done around educating individuals about dying, about the dying process, about all that's involved in the care of someone who's dying, the preparation of death, and then obviously the after death care piece is huge. And so that's when Cassie and I met, through that desire to, again, contribute something to the collective. And yeah, we started the project.
Wow. So Cassie, talk to us about your background and how did you get into the work you're doing?
Yeah, so from a very, very young age, like 6-ish, I definitely could already sense the pain in other people and felt a strong calling to be in service to others, but I really didn't know what that would look like. And I didn't know what that would look like for a really long time. And I remember what really got me started on this path was, if you guys remember, the time in which people with AIDS were stigmatized, and you were hearing a lot of stories of folks whose friends and communities basically abandoned them and they were dying alone. And when I heard about that, it just really spoke to my heart. And I really wanted to be a companion to people. I didn't want them to die alone. So in my mid 20s, I moved to New York City to go to graduate school, which I didn't end up doing. It was way too expensive. But when I was there, I called an AIDS nonprofit and I described to them, what I was interested in. And they said, well, have you ever considered hospice work? And I had never heard of hospice. I'm 40 and I didn't experience my first death until I was 37. So I just wasn't something I was familiar with. But when they described it to me, I immediately was like, yes, that is exactly what I want to do. So I started looking at nonprofits there and then unexpectedly moved back to Asheville in 2010. And like within a month or so of moving back, I signed up to be a volunteer at Care Partners as Solace, where Aditi works. It was before she was there, but I signed up as a volunteer. And so in doing hospice volunteer work, I started to learn about what a death doula was and felt really, really drawn to that, but could never really wrap my mind around how I could make a living doing it. And heard about the Center for End of Life Transitions, which is a local organization that offers different workshops on death and dying. And I was so excited. I was like, oh my God, I have to take all of them. I like really could not wait. I was like, sign me up. I want to learn all of it. And so it was 2016 when I was, no, 2015 when I started one of those workshops. And at the time, Caroline Young, who is the director of Center for End of Life Transitions, was just starting Carolina Memorial Sanctuary, which is it's the green cemetery that I now work at. It's technically what's known as a conservation burial ground, because we do land conservation in addition to green burial. So I was doing that workshop, and to make a long story short, essentially she offered me my dream job. She realized that doing both of those projects by herself was just untenable and asked me if I was looking for a job, and actually had a really good job at the time, but like literally it was my dream job. I was a little goth girl. I still am. And I like loved cemetery. I still do. I always loved cemeteries. Like anyone who's known me throughout my life, they're like, this is the perfect job for you. I'm like, I know. So it's so amazing. I feel incredibly blessed because I care so deeply about people. I feel such a strong. I mean, this is a calling for sure. And the fact that I get to both be of service to people, to support families through such a sacred event, and also get to use the business side of my mind. I'm like very business minded. I love the fact that I got to help create Carolina Memorial Sanctuary. It really feeds all the parts of me. And yeah, Aditi and I first met actually at we were both helping to organize for Stephen Jenkinson when he came here 3 years ago. I think it was exactly in November. And then 2 years ago, Aditi reached out to me And essentially, she reached out to let me know on behalf of Carolina Memorial Sanctuary that she had this idea for this business, and it was almost identical to an idea that I had for a project I had already started called Death Activism. And we both left the meeting being like, I think we're supposed to do this together. I mean, it was definitely not intended. It was just like we both had the same vision, and we didn't know each other very well. Like we had, met each other through that event, but we didn't know each other. But it's been a blessing. I mean, it's been 2 years, and we just work together so well. We really, really do. Like we really balance each other out, and it just comes from our heart of, like Aditi was saying, just seeing how overwhelming it is to navigate death and dying. There is a lot of complexity. The information is very disparate.
Right.
And most people, because we're in a death denying culture, unfortunately, they don't start addressing these issues until they need to.
Right.
And then it's even more overwhelming because they're under stress.
Right. They're overwhelmed already.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
our ultimate goal with Center for Conscious Living and Dying is to help people navigate that process. We want to help act as guides. So connect people to resources, create a whole pathway for people to make sense of the living and dying process, how it's all connected. So yeah.
Wow, this is amazing. So I want to ask specifically about one word in the title, which is Center for Conscious Living and Dying. Tell me about the word conscious. Tell me about what you are trying to say. I know what I sense when I hear conscious living and dying, but I want to hear from you. What are you hoping to spark in people who read that?
So I'll share. First of all, I want to say that word, we pondered and meditated on that word a lot. Partly because of the many layers, with which you could interpret that, and the connotations and the associations with that word. But the main feeling, or when I think of the word conscious, I think of awareness and awake, approaching death, approaching your life and your living and your dying and your death with an awareness and an open mind.
Right.
So that's why I feel like it's an appropriate word and a potent word.
Oh, I agree. And Cassie, what would you add to that?
Yeah, no, I think she really hit the nail on the head. I think that where we felt a lot of concern is that the term consciousness is often associated with a new age community. And although Aditi and I are very spiritual people, we're also incredibly grounded and practical. And we really want what we're offering to be accessible to all people, regardless of faith, no faith, being atheist, being religious, etc. And there was this concern about people being turned off by it. But yeah, what she said is perfect. It's just about awareness, just
Right.
going into your life and death with awareness.
And I think that I'm also a coach, and one of the things I do in my work with the dying and the grieving is I help them work through feeling like a victim. Because when we have a diagnosis, or when an accident has happened, or when there's been something traumatic, we very often sort of slide down that scale of human emotion and experience, and we're right there at the bottom. And we can feel like we're at the effect of this thing which is happening to us. And for me, the opposite of that is feeling like a creator, feeling like I'm creating or co-creating my life. And what I discovered as I started 30 years ago to work with those who were dying is you can't change everything about what's happening. But when you educate yourself and learn what the choices are, and then you make a deliberate, conscious choice, you feel more like the co-creator than you do when you just allow yourself to feel like a victim. So I think what you're doing, even in calling your business the Center for Conscious Living and Dying, is you're giving people that hope, that spark of hope, that maybe, so yes, I am dying, or I'm in this difficult situation with my mother or my sister or my spouse, but maybe we can do this in a more deliberate way that allows us to feel like we're co-creating something. Yeah. So talk to me about this project. So I know you both have your own work. Cassie, you're working at, helping people plan these beautiful green burials. And Aditi, I have sat in Care Partners in the Solace Hospice with you and seen the wonderful care that you give your patients there. So I know you have that, you each bring sort of this wealth of knowledge, but tell me about this project. Tell me what you want to help people with. And I choose to do this interview specifically because I feel like you and other people like you, we are almost are activists wanting to transform the way death and dying has been treated and has been done for the last maybe 100 years. And so I see you at the forefront of this, on the leading edge of this. So yes, so talk to us about this project.
So, kind of going back to one of the things I was saying earlier, um, death and dying in the United States, all the aspects of it, there's actually a lot. There's a lot of things to consider. And one of the exercises, one of the things that Aditi and I knew we wanted to create very early on was a map, an actual map that shows the whole process and how everything is connected. And we started working on this map and we were kind of blown away by the complexity of it. Like we were literally drawing all these nodes and how everything was connected, and it was just insane. And we all know as people that having an infographic, having something visual
Right.
to help represent something can really help us wrap our minds around something, especially something that's complex. So that is one, it's a simple thing, but it's actually a really big thing. So we've already created this map and we literally use it because it's so helpful in terms of understanding the process. And so what we are going to do starting next year is we're launching a 12-month life and death journey. So this follows the map that we've created, and it's a 12-month journey where each month we focus on a single topic. So we'll do a webinar, for example, where we allow people to ask their questions that month while we focus. So let's just say it's the month that focuses on the dying process. So like April will start with the dying process before we can talk about everything else. What is hospice? What is green burial? What grief? All of the pieces. We still want to kind of start with the beginning. Like, what does it even mean to die? What does that look like? Not just the physical aspect of death, but the other aspects of dying as well. So if we're looking at that first month in April 2021, it's, talking about the subject, providing resources, and really just doing a deep dive every month, but in a connected way that really helps people to wrap their mind around it. And so that is one of the really big offerings. It's nice to have structure. And so that's kind of where we're going to start because we do have really full lives. And like you said earlier, our work is intense, doing burials, assisting people as they're dying, and also DT's a mom, and so it's a lot. It's why it's taken us this long, but it's okay. It's totally okay, and we've built a beautiful foundation, and we're very very excited because this is really a passion project for us. We're not making any money doing this. It's really just because we have experienced through our jobs how confusing this is and how much people struggle with trying to understand everything. So it's honestly super just practical. It's just like super practical, just brass tacks, helping people understand. And then eventually one of our other offerings that we'll launch next year is we're going to create a local directory. So the main offering is for everybody, anybody that's, probably geared more towards the United States just because of the structures that exist in this country. But we will also have a local component where we help just have a resource listing all the different providers in this area.
Wonderful.
And Aditi, is there something I missed? Do you have anything to add?
No, I think that's perfect. Yeah. I want to add that, ultimately my vision would be, I did a death doula training. And so my vision would be to bring my medical knowledge with the death doula work and offer it more intimately. And well, that's way down the road, but so a little more direct care. I'd ultimately, it would be nice for somebody to just be able to pick up the phone and connect with a human, with
Yeah.
the website being a big part of that interaction, but just direct care.
Right.
That's a ways away though.
Yeah. And I really appreciate the care and attention that you're giving to building the foundation of this business. It took me 18 years to write my book, Transforming Death, because I was doing the same thing. I was laying the foundation. I was acquiring knowledge and skill. It was 30 years ago that I attended my first death, and that sparked a knowledge and knowing that, because I only had months to prepare myself, that we all need more information. And we don't need to begin acquiring the information when our loved one is in the active dying phase. We need the information well before that. One of the things I discovered as my book was originally 400 pages. And last December, I started working with a book coach who said, you have an encyclopedia, and people who are in overwhelm are not going to be able to read this. You've got to take some of this material out, or it's only going to be used as a reference book by death care providers. So I took out 150 pages, and the 150 pages covered the 200 plus decisions that someone who has a terminal diagnosis is going to have to make at some point in the process. And so, there's such a need for the kind of information that your project is going to provide for people. And then there's such a need for local resources. So I'm just wildly excited to, my book and my work, I focus mostly on how to create the sacred space in the room, and in, if someone's dying at home, down the hall where the family is going to meet, or it could be in a hospice or another facility. But what are the action steps that you take to really create a sacred space, where I imagine your work is going to cover that plus so much more, all the way through to green burial, if that's what people are choosing.
Yeah, and there's a more subtle but deep goal with our project, which is really shifting and healing the relationship that we have with death in this culture.
Yes.
Really humanizing the experience. So we are going to be at the forefront of the website, and intentionally we're going to have a YouTube series called When I Go. And it's intentionally putting our faces to this because it's easy to feel very alone in this process. And so we really want to humanize this as much as possible, but also help people walk away. So at the 12-month journey, it ends with living. So we've divided the process of life to living, dying, and after death. So in 3 sections. But we actually start the journey with dying, go to after death, and end with living, because the connection between how we live our life really can affect how we die. And also just wanting to inspire people and help as much as we possibly can to soften some of that fear that gets in the way. And like anything, the more we avoid it, the more that fear grows. So, the goal would be to help people just engage in this process, even if it just starts by educating themselves more, But of course, taking action, creating an end of life plan, having these meaningful conversations with loved ones, um, but more importantly, living a full life, living a life that is true to oneself, not being on your deathbed with regrets.
Do you know, that's the thing that I feel um, we need to be more afraid of living a life that's not aligned with our values than we need to be afraid of dying. I'm not afraid to die. I have midwifed so many deaths. I've had so many shared death experiences. I've almost died myself. So I'm not afraid to die. I am afraid to live my life in a way that's unaligned with my values. And that's why I take such a strong stand for social justice and racial equity, because I have witnessed so many deaths and I have seen so many regrets, and I can't, it has inspired the way I live my life. I can't wait until I have reached a certain stage in my life to get involved in some issues and to make a difference in the world. I have to do that now, even with the limited money and circumstances that I have. And that decision was inspired by attending so many deaths and seeing so many regrets. You know, and Cassie, you bring up something really interesting, and that is that we we all live in a death phobic culture. And I think you said you were 37 when you experienced your first death.
Right.
Yeah, I was 35. Um, and I feel like we don't really have good ways to frame it, good language around it, which is why the first few chapters in my book, I really take on, what do you believe about death? Because what I noticed for myself 30 years ago, caring for my mother when she was dying, is I would walk into her room, and I live 6 hours away. So I was coming down in the beginning, I was coming down for 1 week a month. My sisters and I were taking shifts. And then at the end, it was more frequently. But I would walk into a room and immediately my body would register the changes in her body. So the yellowing of the skin, the enlarging of the tumors. And so there was this immediate sort of contraction in my body, just sort of painful awareness, a physical awareness that registered in my body of what was happening to her body. And I would breathe through that. But then I started to notice that there were these beliefs that were also causing a contraction. And if I didn't address them, they were actually sitting there between my mother and I, like a wall between us. And I realized that I needed to take on these beliefs and deliberately work with them and see if I really did believe them. And, you know, this was 30 years ago, so I'm sure the medical profession, Aditi, you can tell me if this is true, but I'm very hopeful that the medical profession itself is no longer, that we won't hear the message that death is a failure, that death is a failure of the medical system to heroically save the patient. I'm hoping that that isn't out there as much. I mean, we were one of the first families in Greensboro, North Carolina, where my parents lived, to have hospice. And, you know, hospice and palliative care has brought in so much that hopefully has changed. But back then it was like, death is a failure of the medical system. Death is a failure of your ability to pray. Death is like, you know, I had to reframe all of these sort of death is the final end, death is a failure beliefs for myself, so that I could be fully present in a place of openness and presence for what my mother was going through. So yeah, maybe you can speak a little bit to what you found in the medical system around death, how it's different now, hopefully.
So I think there's still, unfortunately, there's still a generation of providers that believes death is a failure. I think inherent in the medical system is that doctors will fix and heal or cure, not necessarily even heal. So unfortunately, I think it's still, because we still get very late referrals to hospice. People are coming to hospice while they're actively dying when they could have benefited from services.
Oh
month,
my
6
goodness.
months less prognosis. So people could have benefited from it much sooner.
Right.
So it's still a very deep-seated belief. And I think a lot of the belief that death is a failure depends on, or shows up depending on what age an individual is. So I've seen like a young woman, 40-year-old with breast cancer with young children. That feeling that she didn't do enough or couldn't beat this cancer comes up more than it might in a 90-year-old who's had a good life,
Right.
who's
Right.
accepting of their dying, their mortality. So yeah, it's hard to generalize, but it's still a pervasive feeling.
Right.
It's
Right.
unfortunate. And in our community in Asheville, there's, and pockets around the country, there are people that choose non-conventional therapies. And it's wonderful if they heal or cure their cancer naturally, but then if they don't, they feel they failed. So there's so many layers to it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I look forward to learning more about what your offer is, because I feel like it's so important for us to bring an ancient wisdom back into the conversation in this Western culture that we live in around death. Because I believe in ancient times, death was considered part of the cycle of life, part of the circle of life. And that that death was a family-centered experience, and that the dying person was what I call the locus of attention, and that even children were death literate. And I think, at least for the last 100 years, we've lost that in this country.
Yeah, in this country we have, and there are, as I'm sure that people listening will know, plenty of cultures that actually still do treat death that way. It's very much a Western phenomena.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So if people are, most of the people that are in my online community are thinking about death. We're in a pandemic right now, and most of the people on my list are between the ages of 40 and 60, and I think we're all kind of thinking about what do we need to do to feel prepared. What would you say that would be helpful for someone who hasn't really thought through what they might need to think through?
You don't know what you don't know. Um, this is gonna sound so self-promotional, but I'm not even trying to be like that. But I was like really thinking about your question, and I was like, they should go on our death journey. But like, it's definitely not the only answer. But the thing that's nice about it is that it's not, it's a lot of information and it's being spread out over 12 months, which to some people might sound like, well, that's really long. But the point is that people can engage at their leisure and also engage specifically on the topics where they need more information. Maybe they already know a lot about hospice, but they're not really sure about body aftercare. They don't know about home funerals. They don't know what the options are for caring for a body after death. So it really gives people the ability to engage in the ways that are most meaningful. Um, there are a lot of good books out there. There's a lot of good online tools, checklists. I think the problem in part about death and dying is that it easily becomes a very logistical conversation. For example, people oftentimes seems like the solution is having a will and your advanced care directives, when really when it comes to preparing for death, those are probably the two they're definitely not the most important thing, not by a long shot. Um, yeah, it is unfortunately really complicated. I wish I had a simple answer for you, but I just I don't think that it is simple, except that the good thing is that we are not unique. Center for Conscious Living and Dying is not unique. There's a whole movement,
Yes.
huge movement of people right now who are bringing sort of similar offerings. And so a really quick, easy way would be for someone to look for a local death cafe. This will give them the opportunity, if they just look up Death Cafe, it's a national organization that allows you to like have very casual conversations with other people about death and dying. And there are lots of local chapters. So even if you don't live in Asheville or Hendersonville, there is other local chapters. Another great resource is the Conversation Project. You can look up the Conversation Project, and that'll give you some helpful resources and guidance towards having these meaningful end of life conversations with loved ones. Um, Trying to think if there's any other, Aditi, is there anything coming to you of like,
Resources,
yeah, just like until,
those two. There's a big symposium free this year called End Well. Speakers from all over the country, and tech people, death care workers. It's a wonderful offering. I think one thing that comes to mind in response to your question is, for the first time, just acknowledging that we are mortal, I think is just something to sit with and just ponder, and that's really for me, one of the first steps is first acknowledging that it's possible and is likely and will happen at some point. But then also having conversations with your loved ones. And like Cassie said, it's not so important to fill out the forms initially, but I do think just starting to have conversations with your loved ones.
I so agree with that. I have a good friend who is now with her brother who's in the hospital dying. It's not COVID, he had an illness, but he had the advanced care directive. He had all of that filled out, but because he hadn't educated, he hadn't had the conversations with the family members who were living in town. Now he's in the hospital, he's intubated, he's on a respirator. Like, it's not what he wanted. It's not at all what he wanted. And so it doesn't matter if you have the piece of paper, if that piece of paper is in a drawer and your family member doesn't know because you've never had the conversation.
that's exactly right. That's why I think it's way overly emphasized. Also, and Aditi can attest to this as a doctor. In a medical emergency, no one's pulling out your advanced care directives. They're just not. So having an advocate that knows what your wishes are and can speak on your behalf is critical. Yeah. Trying to
Yeah.
think.
They work well together, ideally. But the most important thing is having a spokesperson.
Right.
And then that also guides, like, if there's ever a question of, am I doing the right thing? You just kind of think back to, what did my loved one tell me?
Right.
What's in writing? Sometimes then you can go to the document and say,
Right.
it just gives you a compass,
Yeah. I was the, what do you call it? The, now it's escaping me. For one of my,
power of attorney.
yes, healthcare power of attorney for one of my dearest friends. She and I have been friends, for over 30 years, really close friends. And she was like a sister to me. And it wasn't easy during her dying process to be driving back and forth to Greensboro. But I am so glad for all of it, because she saw me through every single chapter of my book. We discussed, I knew what she wanted, she knew what I wanted. And so I not only had the document, but I had all of those conversations to draw on when we were making the decisions for her end of life care. And I'm really proud of how it went and how supported she was able to be. So I think that's a really, really good point. It's not so much the pieces of paper as the relationships.
And I think maybe this hopefully will inspire people is that in my experience, when I meet with people that are coming to pick their spots, for example, of where they're going to be buried, there's actually a huge relief that comes when you finally get around to making your plans. If you're somebody listening to this and you say to yourself, "I've got time," be careful with that thought. I hear people say that all the time. Doesn't matter how old they are. They can be in their 60s, they can be in their 70s, they can be in their 80s. I guess it's one of the hidden blessings of the pandemic is it's really been a wake-up call for a lot of people because we always think of death on the horizon. It's out there. And it's not like it's fun to plan for. I mean, there is a lot of kind of like logistical pieces, which is no one's excited about that. Um, so whatever fear or resistance you're feeling, the comfort of just knowing what you want, that you've taken the time to think it through, that you've documented it, and what we are all emphasizing, you've articulated it to your loved ones. I always tell people that it's not sufficient to say, you'll find it in this drawer, like you need to
Mhm.
verbally tell them.
Yes.
Also, there's different interpretations. Someone can read the same thing and interpret it differently. So yeah, it might be uncomfortable. Even I meet with lots of people who are in their 60s, and it's their kids that are the ones that are resistant to having the conversations. Aditi experiences this too. It doesn't always work in the way that we, commonly think of it. All the time I have people whose kids, they can be in their 40s, 30s, and they're just like, I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to talk about it. And they say, I tell them like, I know it makes them uncomfortable, but you're gonna have to talk about it. You just have to.
Yeah, I guess my kids are so used to it because we've been having these conversations for 30 years now. Wow, it didn't occur to me that it might be the younger ones resisting. But
Mhm.
yeah, but it's really important that and I don't you agree that every single time an individual sort of breaks through the barrier of the fear that's been inculcated into us by we live in such a one up, one down society where youth is over aging and masculine principles are over feminine. No, no, we have to, we don't know what we don't know, like you said, Cassie. We have to look at things from a more holistic perspective and bring it all into the circle. Um, it's do either of you know of Amy Cunningham? She's a friend of mine. We've been in Martha Jo Atkins dying school together, and so when we moved here 3 years ago, my husband and I had our plan in place of how we wanted to be cremated, and for me, it was a decision made because there weren't any really good green burial options where we moved from, but it was also it was the least expensive option, but I'm an environmentalist, so I also want to go with least impact for my, after death care of the body, the disposition of the body. And I saw Amy do a presentation for Dying School and another presentation a week later at the Art of Dying conference. And I said to my husband over dinner, we have to rethink this because our thought process was we don't have children who live anywhere close to Asheville. They're not going to want to come to Asheville to the graveside. It's going to be easier and less expensive for them just a direct cremation. Until I realized it's not likely that we're going to go together. One of us will be left behind, and that graveside might matter. And after looking at all of those beautiful images of green burials and the feeling that experience gives to the family about bringing death into the natural cycle of life, I have to rethink the whole thing. So I may be calling you Cassie.
Yeah, no, I mean, both because also cremation is really not good for the environment.
Right.
What we decide to do with our body after we die is a complex decision, and And for some people, that is what makes most sense. Maybe that's part of your family tradition. Maybe, I mean, money's a real thing. That is a consideration or part of, your religious or spiritual practice, etc. But for somebody, again, it's all about making informed decisions. So I think it is important to know that cremation releases carbon dioxide and other gases into the atmosphere that are contributing to greenhouse gases. Um, but to me, working at a green cemetery, I'll tell you that it is the burials themselves and the healing that that provides for the families that make that so important. And everything else you're saying is true too. The beauty, being connected to nature, having a tranquil, peaceful, natural place to come visit. Aditi's mother-in-law is buried in my cemetery. She is experienced firsthand both the process of green burial, but also getting to come back and visit Paula's grave with her family and with her friends. But to be hands-on with putting your own loved ones to rest. We also offer that for burial of cremated remains, but of course it is different when it's a body than when it's cremated remains. It just is, and it's incredibly powerful and beautiful. And I've experienced lots and lots and lots of burials. My own loved ones are also buried at Carolina Memorial Sanctuary, and yeah, it's pretty powerful. Aditi, you can
Yeah.
attest to
I
that.
echo that. Yeah, absolutely.
Aditi, you shared with me while you were going through the process with Paula, you shared with me a lot of what was going on. And then you shared that video that I think one of your family members made that included a part of the green burial. And I'm just wondering if you would be willing to share that as a
Oh,
resource
absolutely.
with
Absolutely.
our
I'll send
community.
it. I'll send it your way.
Can you just talk briefly about what that experience, obviously you're a hospice physician, this is your profession, but when it's happening in your home, because Paula died in your home, and when it's happening to a family member that you love so much, can you just speak to us a little from that perspective?
Yeah. What was striking to me, I was probably 35 weeks pregnant when she was dying. And there's the mama brain is a real phenomenon, you know. But my training as a death professional sort of somehow disappeared magically, you know. I was aware of things, but I couldn't really, my mind, my heart, I couldn't really think the way I would if I was taking care of somebody who wasn't so connected to my heart. She was one of my dearest friends, is still. I came to Cassie for support. So it was really helpful to have a friend who I could just, who understood, you know, she just got it. She'd been through it personally with her stepmother and had the language and the skills to guide me. And so that helped tremendously. But then it just came down to this innate knowing how to care for her and a response to what was available. And it really was a creation. It was the most profound experience I've ever had around death and dying. And it was partly who she was as a person and how she lived her life that made it so. But there was music. The house was full of people coming in from out of town to support her, and people showed up when given the opportunity. She had 6 sisters, so that was helpful too. But they showed up. There's lots of celebration, lots of tears, lots of open grieving. My children were involved. So the dying process was profound, intense, beautiful, heart-wrenching, sacred. And we incorporated a lot of integrative support for her, acupuncture, aromatherapy, and including Western drugs and medicines. Very little, though. She didn't need them because of mistletoe and other things. Rick Simpson oil. And then the after death care was profound and beautiful. And the fact that she was open to doing that was really a gift for us. And then obviously the green burial and then the grief work after. So it was just profound, like transforming.
And
Yeah,
for those listening, in case it's not completely obvious, Aditi got to experience a home funeral as well. So being able to care for Paula without the involvement of a funeral home whatsoever.
Right. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah.
She stayed in the state for about, I guess, 36 hours or so.
Mm.
In this room, actually. So,
Mm.
yeah. So, and then we still go to the site where she was buried, and it's magical. There's the kids run around the site, the sanctuary, and we see the hawks and the birds, and then just the natural setting is so conducive to connecting to her spirit.
Right.
So, and a picnic or snacks anyway, and music, and yeah, it's so lovely.
Right. So, so a lot of times, people who are making the decision to attend a course like you're offering, or to take themselves through just getting the paperwork and having the conversations, they want to discharge their responsibility to their loved ones. Like, they don't want to have their loved ones have to make these decisions when they're under stress and such, which is great. Let that be a motivation. But I know that you can hear and feel in our conversation the gifts and the blessings to the family members of having a family-centered, dying person-focused death, whether that's at home or in a facility. It helps the family. It makes a huge difference. My mother died in my arms. My sisters and I cared for her body after she died, and we prepared her body for burial. And that, like you said, was such an empowering experience to us. I've had a handful of very sacred spiritual high points in my life. I'm a Kundalini yoga teacher, and many of those moments have come, after vigorous yoga and then sitting in meditation. But most of those spiritual high points have come at moments of birth, when my 5 newborns, or the 2 other babies I've witnessed their births, were placed in my arms, and as I was holding the bodies of my dying loved ones. There is an experience that is available of, when the one who's dying is crossing that liminal threshold. If you are there, if you are present, if you are conscious and aware, and you are accompanying them with your heart all the way up to the threshold, there's something so magical that will happen for the one who stays here in the 3rd dimension. My life has been so changed by all of these experiences. And it's my joy to empower others to have similar experiences. And so instead of feeling like they have to tiptoe into the hospital room and just say a quick goodbye, they're actually participating in the physicalness of the process. Because only when we are treating the body with the kind of respect that the ancient midwives did, do we get to have a fullness of the emotional and the mental and the spiritual growth and maturity that's possible at these moments. And I'm guessing you would both agree with me there.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So for both of you, is there anything that you were hoping to talk about or share with our listeners that we haven't covered yet?
I was reminded of David Kessler. He spoke at the Art of Dying conference too, and I think there he said, we prepare more for a weekend getaway than we do our own death. And that was just so profound for me, and so basic and so true, and so telling. And it doesn't take a whole lot, just a little goes a long way. The majority of people I see have no conversation, So yeah, they definitely prepare for a weekend getaway way more than they do their own death. So yeah, a little can go a long way.
Awesome. Well, I look forward to learning more, and I will be sharing in April when you're ready to offer your school, your year-long program. I want to be in it. I want to share it with my community because I think it's an amazing resource. And I think even with all the research I've done, I still find nuances of things that I haven't explored yet or haven't thought about yet, like I experienced with Amy Cunningham's presentation. So I really look forward to what you're bringing forth, and I'm thrilled to be able to support it, because my hope is that our grandchildren are going to have what I call the death mysteries are going to be a part of their life. That we're going to ease our way out of this sort of generation of people who aren't comfortable or empowered or familiar with death, and they can only be frightened of it. Like, let's do for the death community, the community of death and dying, what the natural childbirth movement did for birthing parents. Let's change this. So
Absolutely. And the awesome thing is that it's absolutely taking course. We're on the way. It's happening. It's absolutely happening. Aditi's children, their first interaction with death were home funerals and green burials. A lot often when I facilitate a burial, it'll be a young person there. It's their first burial, and it really excites me. Like, this is their introduction, to death and
right.
dying. Like, this is what they get to experience, and just know that there's a different way, and a way in which the heart is there and the soul is there, and we can be fully present, um, as whole people.
Yeah.
That's the thing. This is going to happen to all of us. We're all going to die. And that fear prevents us from, like you were saying, from truly showing up fully and engaging in that experience, where even though it's difficult, it's real. Or we need to be able to participate in it fully. It doesn't do us any favors to avoid that. Um, so we are on the right track. We are. Things are
Yeah.
going to get better. Things are already getting better.
Yeah, I appreciate hearing that from you, Cassie. One of the things I probably you've noticed this, and maybe there's even some statistical evidence to back this up. But over the last 30 years, as I've coached countless clients through the death of a loved one or their own death, um, what I have seen and what I've experienced with my own loss of loved ones is that the extent to which I participate fearlessly, and fearlessly for me means feeling the fear and doing it anyway, and the extent to which I'm able to do that is the extent to which I have a grief process that is productive. Not that it's not painful, it will be painful, but that is productive and that results in me feeling just as close and connected to my deceased loved one as I did when they had skin on.
Oh, that's beautiful. Yeah, that's what was coming to me when you were sharing about showing up and being present and engaging with all of it, as someone's dying. It really does kind of not transform, but it does influence the grieving process for the living. Yesterday was actually Paula's birthday. She would have been 73.
Oh, wow.
And we did just that. We sat around, lit a candle last night, the whole family, 7-year-old, 5-year-old, and 1-year-old, and Jay and I, my husband and I, and we did her angel cards. That's just a signature thing she did with everyone she met. And that was our ritual, to honor her birthday. Yeah. We had popcorn too. She loved popcorn. So yeah, it completely made us feel connected to her. Yeah.
Sweet.
Mm-hmm. So sweet.
Yeah. Yeah. I find that my loved ones that have passed, that I've participated in their passing. Like I call them my dead ones. I have a committee of dead ones. And at any moment when I need a certain kind of support, I can tune into that dear one and hear the advice they would give me, or feel the love, or feel the support, or hear the words. And it's incredibly supportive. And I feel like that comes from just being so in the process. Yeah. So thank you both for everything you bring, for the maturity and the skill and the knowledge and the wisdom that you bring to this conversation. I'm thrilled to be part of this with you. Thank you both so much.
Thank you.
Melanie.